This next section of the course is called odds and ends. These are things that I could have included in other sections of the course, but I didn't want to distract too much from driving at that deeper understanding of the JavaScript programming language. But still, these things are interesting, and parts of, in some ways, the things that people find odd or weird or difficult to get used to. So let's start with initialization. We've seen how we can use object literals, array literals, and function expressions to set up our objects, arrays, and functions. What I find is when folks who aren't yet used to all that literal notation come across a large initialization of objects in JavaScript, they can get a little overwhelmed by the syntax. For example, maybe I'm going to create an array of people. So I use my array literal, my brackets. And then I'm going to put my first element in my array, and it's an object. So I use an object literal. And then maybe I give it a property. So here's my name value pairs, another name value pair, and then maybe some addresses, which are also an array. So I put brackets there, and I do maybe a couple of addresses. And then I'm going to do my second element in my array. So maybe this is Jane, similar with other addresses. And as you can see as we're typing, this starts to get large, and those that aren't used to it can be a bit intimidated by what they're looking at. Maybe I'll also add for Jane a function expression that defines a method for that object. So when you look at this, when this gets extremely large, a lot of data, it can get a bit intimidating. And maybe even there might be some comments, as we mentioned in our, let's do the John object, as we mentioned in our whitespace lesson. But don't be intimidated. This is a really clean and useful way to initialize data. And it's also really nice for prototyping. Say you're building some software that's not yet connected to a database or an API. You can easily set up some data like this to use in your interface so that you can see what it will look like. And then when you're ready, you can have this object get its data, maybe via some JSON from an API. And your interface is already ready for data that looks like this. You can do testing, you could use ability test, your interface, see if users can use it all right before you go down the road of implementing the full software. So that's good. Also a good IDE, that is a good program to do your actual typing in, your actual programming in, is good. Brackets, for example, nicely highlights where my brackets and curly braces should be. If you do find yourself missing little things, commas are the most often to miss when you're doing a big initialization like this. You'll likely see an error message that looks something like this: unexpected something. An unexpected token maybe, or maybe if you miss a comma inside an array, an unexpected string or number. This just means the syntax parser is going through and has certain expectations, and it sees something that it doesn't expect. Like without that comma, it doesn't expect to see a starting curly brace. So it says, well, that's unexpected. So when you see those kinds of errors when you have a big initialization like this, you just need to figure out where you're missing either your closing or opening brackets or braces, your colon, or your comma. I also find that people will occasionally do this. They'll accidentally use equals instead of colon because they're thinking in terms of setting variables. And so you'll get that unexpected token again. When I'm doing literal syntax, object literal, these are colons, not equal signs. So those are just some tips. This again can be very useful to set up a lot of data quickly and try it out in your interface. So don't be intimidated when you see large initializations of arrays and objects. It's useful. And if we console.log this people array, which is this top-level variable being initialized, and I refresh, then I have two objects. It has a length of 2. Inside my John Doe object, I have my addresses. And then I have my second element in my array, which is my Jane Doe object, which has addresses and a greet method. And so I can do something like people, the Jane object, greet. And there we go. So my array is nicely initialized and full of data. So this is useful. That's initialization.